Annette, First Love, and the Paris Olympics. A short romance story. Written by Misha Quinn, 2024. All rights reserved. Copyright Misha Quinn, 2024. Annette, First Love, and the Paris Olympics. Annette sat on the spectator stand for the Paris Olympics and looked out over the water of the Seine. The triathlon was going well, and she enjoyed the spectacle of this unusual competition. Remy, her childhood friend, sat next to her. In fact, he was the one who had brought her here to the podium of this competition. At first, Annette had resisted the idea. She did not really like triathlons, but Remy had once dreamed of joining his country's triathlon team as a child and had been training hard. Unfortunately, the guy got a knee injury, and because of this, he had to give up his dream of competing at the Olympic Games for his country. And now Annette kept him company. Annette had been friends with Remy since she was 5. At least, that was what she thought. In fact, their families had met a long time ago, long before they had children, but had drifted apart. When both young families suddenly met in the same neighborhood of Paris, walking with newborn babies, their communication resumed. Throughout her childhood, Annette knew Remy was always protecting her. The boy was so imbued with the desire to protect and defend her from any adversity, from a simple fall in the sandbox, when he immediately rushed to lift her, crying, from his lap to protect her from a group of boys at school, whose wicked jokes also sometimes brought her to tears. Annette was a girl of frail will. She was fonder of reading historical novels and stories, and dreamed of entering the Sorbonne to study literature and art after graduation. The Faculty of Fine Arts attracted her, passionately drawing everything she could see around her, and even what no one saw only from her imagination, attracted Annette most of all. As a result, the girl, having presented her artistic works, passed the entrance examinations with excellence, and, to her incredible joy, was admitted to the Faculty of Fine Arts of this university Les Beaux-Arts. Remy, having finished school, went straight into the army. The guy did not want to postpone military service in the army, and he was right, it gave him a lot of experience, which he could apply in the future. While serving in the military, Remy passed various psychological tests, and he was advised to enter medical school after finishing his service. After serving his army conscription, he entered medical school as a cardiologist. It was difficult for him, as Remy had spent only a year properly preparing for the entrance exams after the army, and now he was sitting next to Annette, proud that this summer was becoming special for him. He was waiting for the admissions committee of his institute to decide whether he had passed all the tests. Annette wanted to surprise her friend today. In fact, the medical university's answer came to his parents' address. Leaving for the Olympics in the province, they gave this important letter to the girl, requesting invited to their son. Remy's parents were worried that this letter suddenly contained a refusal of admission to the institute. Remy would need someone close to him for support. And if all is well, and the institute accepts the boy, he will have someone to share this joy with, because his best friend, Annette, is best suited for this. In these thoughts that she had gone to this competition only to hand Remy the envelope with the answer to the results of the entrance exams, Annette agonized, sitting on the hard bench under the rays of the scorching sun. Remy was simply absorbed in the competition and kept turning to her, looking for the same admiration he felt in her eyes. Annette smiled sweetly at her friend, but since she was here only for him, the girl decided she would not tell Remy how she was tired of it all. A little more time and they would be alone. On the way home, she would give Remy his envelope, and they would find out whether the answer was positive or negative. Annette did not believe Remy would get into this prestigious educational institution. Many people aspired to enter it. The profession of doctor had been in their family for a long time and was passed down from generation to generation. And Remy is nobody, just a guy who likes to help others. Annette was preparing herself to comfort Remy and help him through the rejection of his medical school application. Suddenly, one athlete swimming in the river's murky waters disappeared under the water. No one was competing behind him, and his team's cheerleading squad was ahead of him, and quite far away from the spot. There was a shout from the other side of the Seine. Apparently, it was the athlete's coach. He pointed to where his mentee had disappeared under the water. The elderly man ran as hard as he could to the other side of the river, but it would take a minute or more, since he had to climb the bridge first. The girl glanced at Remy and saw that he was quickly taking off his sneakers. His face was severe, and he looked at the place where the swimmer had disappeared. Before Annette could say anything, the boy was already running down to the river parapet. In a moment, Remy was already on the parapet and, beautifully and precisely grouped, had jumped down into the water of the Seine. Annette was horrified. Of course, she knew Remy was a former triathlete, and that swimming was one of his main sports passions. But what was happening now was something unusual and dangerous. The Tribune buzzed near the spot where the triathlete had disappeared. Many men ran down, but Remy was already near where the athlete had lost sight. The guy stopped and, taking a couple of deep breaths in and out, dove into the river's dark water. In the first couple of seconds after Remy's running to the Seine, Annette did not move. Then she somehow automatically took his shoes, and Annette jumped up from her seat and, trying desperately not to lose sight of where Remy had dived, walked down to the river parapet. She did not notice that her feet were covered with abrasions from the benches she had tripped over as she descended the platform. When the girl found herself at the riverbank, she ran to the parapet and, grasping it with both hands, leaned toward the river, trying to see Remy in its murky waters. There was nothing to be seen for a while, but suddenly, a sigh of relief ran through the crowd surrounding the place, as Remy's head emerged from the water. The guy struggled to pull the head of the swimmer behind him to the surface of the water, with his eyes closed. Remy supported him on his back, holding him under his armpits, and, flailing the water vigorously with his feet, tried to keep himself and the athlete he was rescued from on the surface. A couple more men had jumped into the river, and were already swimming to Remy's aid. Nearby ambulance sirens wailed, and medical and event officials ran to the parapet. With the help of other men, Remy pulled the swimmer to the edge of the river parapet, where the emergency services were already lowering a stretcher and rope ladder to the water. The unconscious swimmer was still not regaining consciousness. He was placed directly in the Ode on a stretcher, and the emergency workers lifted him up to the ambulance. Those who had rescued the swimmer then climbed out of the water. Remy was the last one out of the water. He puffed, and water ran down his face, falling from his thick black hair onto his chest. The guy did not know what would happen next and stood back, waiting for the emergency workers to decide what was wrong with that swimmer. Many people approached Remy and thanked him for his brave act. The guy responded to the words of gratitude with embarrassment, straining to gaze into the half-open doors of the ambulance, where the doctor was trying to bring the athlete to his senses. Finally, he listened out of the conversation with the patient, and Remy saw the man wave weakly at him, thanking him for saving him. Remy finally smiled, and only now realized he was surrounded by a crowd. He looked for Annette. The girl was standing near to him, but she did not approach him, as she did not know if there was anything she could do to help in this situation. After all, she was terribly afraid of water and could not swim. Realizing that Remy was fine, Annette finally ran up to him, wading through the crowd, many of whom wanted to thank him. Once she was next to him, The guy sighed heavily and told her, "There you go. I've ruined your whole day. Sorry." Annette suddenly hugged him. Even though Remy's clothes were completely wet, it did not embarrass the girl. She suddenly hugged him hotly and whispered in his ear, "It's so good that you're all right." Annette had expected none of this from herself. She and Remy usually just kissed each other on the cheeks, as was customary to greet people they knew in France, and that had always been enough for them. But now the girl felt she needed to think that Remy was alive and well, that he was beside her, and would always be beside her. Remy looked no longer toward the ambulance, taking the recovered athlete away, but only at Annette. It seemed to him now that what he had just done no longer mattered. All that mattered was that Annette was by his side and taking care of him. Remy had enjoyed success with girls his own age, but none of them had so far, for whatever reason, suited him well enough for him to have an affair with her. Some, looking at his attractive looks, some girls who didn't know him well, had even exchanged their opinions with their friends, saying that since he had not paid attention to them, the answer was simply that Remy liked guys better. But that was not the case. Just now, Remy realized that none of his friends were even close to Annette. Remy put his arms around Annette and kissed her on the top of her head right into her fragrant hair. He hugged the girl gently but firmly. The young people embraced each other for a while, experiencing new feelings for each other. Suddenly, Annette moved away from Remy. He glanced at her worriedly, thinking that perhaps he had done something wrong. He was hugging her too hotly. But that was not the case. Annette remembered she had a letter for him. The girl hurriedly pulled an envelope from her purse and held it to Remy. "What is it?" he asked perplexedly. "This is a letter to you," she said, insistently placing the envelope in Remy's palm. "This is your institute's reply about your admission. Your parents asked me to give it to you." The letter came at the last moment when they were already leaving for the province. Remy looked hesitantly at the envelope. Annette put her hand on his shoulder, saying, "Open it, if you don't mind. Now, we need to know what they've decided. I believe there's a positive answer in there." She smiled at him encouragingly. Remy opened the envelope and unfolded the paper it contained. The paper was of excellent quality, and Annette could see some watermarks in the light. Holding the letter in front of him, Remy read it to himself, and his eyebrows rose higher and higher. Annette did not know what to think. "What is it?" Impatiently, she asked and seized Remy by the wrist. "Don't languish, tell me." There was such a plea in the girl's voice that Remy took pity and, shifting his bushy eyebrows, sternly replied, "I am accepted." Annette literally jumped on the spot with joy. Remy had made it to the faculty. "Oh, that's great. You're so good. I'm so happy for you." The girl suddenly put her hands on Remy's shoulders and kissed him fervently right on the lips. Remy stood there, dumbfounded by this much more than the medical school's positive answer about his acceptance to their faculty. Annette realized she had done something wrong, as Remy did not move or hug her back. Annette was embarrassed and wanted to step back from Remy, but he suddenly woke up as if from a dream, and put his arm around her waist, not letting her go. He wanted to share this joyful moment with her. The guy pulled the girl to him and wrapped his arms around her, gently pulling Annette against him and stroking her shoulders. Remy suddenly realized that he had always wanted only Annette and no one else in this world. The young people stood hugging each other, uninhibited by the crowd surrounding them. The attention of these strangers to them had already turned to something else going on around them, and Remy and Annette stood, embraced, undisturbed by anyone. Remy was the first to move away from Annette and, looking at her hesitantly, asked, holding out his hand to her, "Shall we go?" Annette, standing before him with her cheeks drenched in a delicate blush of embarrassment, replied quietly, "Let's go." To them, everything suddenly made so much sense. All the years of their friendship, They had been close to each other, and only now realized that friendship not only unites them. Annette was walking next to Remy in a minute, and her palm was in Remy's palm. That was all they needed now, walking side by side, thinking about the future, and the fact that they had suddenly realized that they needed each other as more than just friends. Remy's clothes had already dried under the rays of the bright summer sun of Paris. They walked like that, holding hands and almost without looking at each other, immersed in their dreams and new feelings, as they explored Paris, a beautiful city full of romance and unexpected discoveries. The End. Written by Misha Quinn, July 2024. All rights reserved. Copyright Misha Quinn, 2024.